Hello, everyone. I'm Cynthia Benz, and I serve as Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the Personalized Medicine Coalition. The Personalized Medicine Coalition is made up of more than 220 members in the healthcare space, including patients, patient advocacy organizations, large and small diagnostic companies, biopharmaceutical companies, research and clinical care institutions, health IT companies, and other strategic partners. In an effort to accelerate a paradigm shift to personalized medicine, where it can positively impact patient outcomes and reduce trial and error approaches to care, our coalition's activities span public education, evidence development, policy, and advocacy. On behalf of the Personalized Medicine Coalition, PMC's member Invitae, and the American Society of Pharmacovigilance, who've all come together to host this virtual congressional briefing, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Breaking Down Barriers to a Personalized Approach to Medications and Reducing Adverse Drug Events. As many of you know, pharmacogenomics is the study of how a person's genetic makeup can affect their response to a drug. We view pharmacogenomics as an important component of personalized medicine because it's a tool that can be deployed in the healthcare system now to guide treatment strategies that are based on individual patient characteristics. The use of pharmacogenomic tests to detect drug-gene associations can play a key role in avoiding adverse events, identifying patients who will or will not respond to certain medications, and informing prescription drug dosing. Those utilizing pharmacogenomics are beginning to demonstrate that it can help lower healthcare costs as well. Very recently, the state of Kentucky Teachers Retirement System published results from their real-world use of pharmacogenomic testing. They found that by offering testing to individuals and letting those results inform prescribing decisions, treatments were better targeted to only those patients who would benefit. Pharmacogenomic testing saved the system $5,176 per enrolled member. The field is at an exciting place, but unfortunately, the number of adverse drug events occurring in this country continues at an alarming rate. The CDC reports that about 1.3 million emergency department visits in the United States are due to situations where an individual is harmed by the use of medications. A good portion of these situations could be prevented by incorporating pharmacogenomic information into clinical care. I'm going to have the honor of introducing Representative Eric Swalwell in a minute, once we know he's joined the program. With Congressman Tom Emmer, they champion the Personalized Congressional Medicine Caucus. In the House of Representatives, the Personalized Medicine Coalition and our members have had the pleasure of working with the caucus co-chairs, their wonderful staff, and their colleagues in the House and Senate on the Congressional Personalized Medicine Caucus since 2019. We're grateful for their efforts to ensure that healthcare policies considered by Congress encourage prevention and treatment strategies that align with patients' biological characteristics, their circumstances, and their values. While we wait for Representative Swalwell to join, I have my pleasure of turning things over to Dr. Christine Ashcraft, who is the Medical Affairs Director of Pharmacogenomics at Invitae, who can provide some high-level information on pharmacogenomics and its use in medication management. So Dr. Ashcraft, if you're ready, please take it away.
Thanks, Cynthia. I have the honor of providing a high-level overview of pharmacogenomics and the adverse drug event epidemic that led Swalwell and Emmer to introduce the Right Drug Dose Now Act. This is Michael. He died of an overdose because he had a pharmacogenetic variation that impacts response to many medications for many conditions for life. In his case, the variation, in combination with his other medications, led to deadly levels of Prozac in his system. I first heard Michael's story over 20 years ago and have dedicated my career to ending avoidable adverse drug events like Michael's. Pharmacogenomics is an underutilized tool in achieving this mission. As Cynthia mentioned, put simply, pharmacogenomics helps us move from one-size-fits-all prescribing to using genetic information to know when a patient may respond better to a higher dose, a lower dose, or a different medication altogether. Unfortunately, Michael's story is not an uncommon one. 99% of patients have a pharmacogenetic variation that will impact their response to one or more medications. Although pharmacogenomics is not the only cause, not taking this variability into account is part of the reason we lose a life every 2 minutes in the United States to non-optimized medications. That's a full 747 every 17 hours. In 2016, we spent $528 billion on non-optimized medications, more than we spent on any major chronic disease and more than we spent on the drugs themselves. And the more medications you take, the more likely you are to have a problem. We now have 40 million patients in the US taking 5 or more medications daily. With the aging baby boomers, the silver tsunami, they expect that to double by 2040. And even if they do not cause harm, half of the medications we prescribe do not work as intended and are therefore wasted therapies, ranging from 38% of antidepressants up to 3/4 of cancer medications. Historically, we have only flagged for binary drug-drug interactions, even though the FDA has stated that significant drug-gene interactions should be considered the equivalent for years in drug development guidance. The FDA includes pharmacogenetic guidance in the product insert for over 100 medications. The same set of genes impact most medications with high evidence across virtually every specialty: behavioral health, cardiology, pain, oncology, and infectious disease, to name a few. Most labs run multi-gene panels. This testing can be ordered once, and as long as that information is stored discreetly in the EHR, similar to allergy information, it can then be used to optimize drug and dose selection for life. Many hospitals are fined by Medicare for readmission for rates that are too high. In a randomized controlled trial of patients in the home in both arms, as medication-related issues are a major cause of readmission, in the arm where pharmacists had access to pharmacogenomic test results and improved clinical decision support that flagged not just for drug-drug, but also drug-gene and drug-drug-gene interactions, there were 52% fewer readmissions, 42% fewer ER visits, 85% fewer deaths, saving $43.82 per patient in just 2 months. As Cynthia mentioned, a more recent real-world evidence study incorporating pharmacogenomics into a comprehensive medication management program for the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System showed a $218 per member per month cost reduction, mainly driven by reductions in emergency room visits and hospitalizations. The IGNITE network, short for Implementing Genomics in Practice, highlighted 3 key strategies for implementing genomic medicine. 1, prioritizing EHR integration. 2, improving clinicians' knowledge. And 3, engaging patients. The RIGHT Act will help with all of these. Reducing adverse drug events can save lives and healthcare dollars for all patients, but the impact is most pronounced in Medicare, as older patients are 400% more likely to suffer from an adverse drug event. Even when accounting for the cost of pharmacogenomic testing and improved clinical decision support, we would only need to reduce adverse drug events in Medicare patients by 5% to save almost $10 billion annually. An achievable 20% reduction would result in $50 billion in annual savings. I'm grateful to Swalwell and Emmer for introducing the RIGHT Act to help us take a huge step forward in making avoidable adverse drug events like Michael's a thing of the past. I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end if there are any, but now I'd like to turn this back over to my esteemed colleague and our moderator, Cynthia Benz. Cynthia?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashcraft. And thanks to Invitae for organizing today's program. Without further ado, I'll ask our esteemed panelists to join me for a discussion on the use of pharmacogenomic information in patient care. Joining us on the panel today are Dr. Aniwa Owusu-Obeng. She is a faculty member with the Charles Bronfman Institute for Personalized Medicine at Mount Sinai's Icahn School of Medicine. She's also the clinical pharmacogenomics coordinator with Mount Sinai Hospital. Welcome. Julie Holt, Chief Nursing Officer and Vice President at the Christ Hospital Network. Dr. Heidi Rehm, who is Chief Genomics Officer and Professor of Pathology at the Massachusetts General Hospital. She's also co-director of the Medical and Population Genetics Program at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. And last but not least, Dr. Philip Empey, Associate Director of Pharmacogenomics at the Pitt UPMC Institute of Precision Medicine. So welcome everyone here today. I'd first like to start off by asking each of you to take a few minutes to introduce yourself. You'll do a much better job than I will. Offer your perspectives on the current state of the field of pharmacogenomics and the use of PGX information in preventing adverse drug events. So Ms. Holt, would you like to kick things off?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. My name is Julie Holt. I'm the Vice President and Chief Nursing Officer at the Christ Hospital Health Network in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I am a registered nurse, which is my clinical background. I first learned about pharmacogenomics from Dr. Burns Blacksall, who heads up our precision medicine program here at the Christ Hospital, and that's been underway for about 3 years. The impact of adverse drug reactions and the multiple medications that our patients are taking at the Christ Hospital, which is a community hospital, was really overwhelming when we looked at our own data. And so I became very interested and actually sit on the steering committee at our hospital. But I'm here today to talk to you about a personal story and how it impacted my life in a few minutes.
Great. Thank you so much. Phil, why don't you go next?
Everyone, I'm Philip Empey. I'm from the University of Pittsburgh and UPMC. I'm a pharmacist by training, and here at the university, I direct the Pharmacogenomics Center of Excellence, which has made pharmacogenomics standard of care in several areas of practice across our health system. We focus primarily on clinical implementation, as well as education and research programs, and I'll share more about those shortly.
Terrific, thank you. Dr. Ream, why don't you go next?
Sure, I'm Heidi Ream. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Genomics Officer at Mass General Hospital. And I just want to share, when I took on this role, which is really responsible for trying to roll out genomic medicine across our healthcare system, that I initially interviewed all of the departments and divisions across the hospital and engaged them in understanding their highest priorities, as well as how they were utilizing genetics. And what I learned from that is, one of the highest priorities and one of the biggest challenges across all of the clinics is the lack of integration of genetics into electronic health record. And two, when I specifically was asking about pharmacogenomics that some of the clinics were using, and I asked them, why do you just order the one marker for the one drug you're ordering when it's usually about the same cost to order a whole panel, and then that information would be there for future use with other drugs? Their answer was, I don't want the liability associated with managing all of those results, because all it is in a PDF associated with my visit with the patient, and I can't manage that myself. It's not in the EHR. And so essentially they're denying, appropriate care to patients because the electronic health record can't help them out. And I think that's one of the reasons that this has been a major issue on my mind for quite some time.
Terrific. Dr. Owusu Obeng, we know that you actually have experience in implementing pharmacogenomics in clinical practice. So would you let us know a little bit about yourself and offer your perspectives on the current state of the field?
Sure. My name is Aniwa Owusu Obeng. I am an assistant professor at the Icahn School of Medicine in Mount Sinai, New York City. I also am the clinical pharmacogenomics coordinator for the Mount Sinai Hospital. And over there, we've been implementing, like you said, since 2013 is when we started enrollment, but 2014 is when we went live with our first program. This was under research protocol at that time. We are in transition now to move it to the whole health system and make it a true clinical service. But as been already stated, this field is, I think we are in a very exciting time when it comes to pharmacogenomics. There are lots of moving parts. We are not just there yet, but we've seen some progress over the last few years. And I think that we'll be talking more about some of the barriers and things that we can do better to actually speed this up further. So I'm happy to discuss that later.
We look forward to hearing it. Ms. Holt, you mentioned that you had a personal experience with pharmacogenomics and adverse drug reactions. We would love to hear more about that, and in particular, how it shaped your thinking on the clinical adoption of pharmacogenomic information.
Thank you. I'm 55 and I'm a nurse, and I've had gastroesophageal reflux disease, otherwise known as chronic heartburn, for about 14 years. And been treated by gastroenterologist with multiple what are referred to as protein pump inhibitors, first generation, over those 14 years with very little relief. That resulted in not really missed work for me, but just quality of life, and also additional and frequent upper GI scopes to make sure that the disease was not progressing. So recently, as I've been involved in our precision medicine and our pharmacogenomics program at the Christ Hospital, I learned more about it and was very interested. And then there was a randomized trial that was done, and I was selected to be a part of it. I immediately was like, yes, I will do that. And interestingly enough, it came back showing that the drugs that I was taking, the PPIs, first generation, that I hypermetabolized them and that they don't work for me. And I was not surprised. I mean, the pharmacist actually called and said, how are those working for you? And I'm like, they're not. I'm still having heartburn 4 or 5 times a week severely. I had to buy a special bed and all those types of things. So they switched my medication to a second generation PPI, and literally overnight, my heartburn went away. And my quality of life has improved significantly. And I was so impressed by it, and the data that was shared by Dr. Blacksall around just population health and the impact of multiple medications on patients, that I also recruited my 80-year-old parents into this and found lots of opportunities there with the medications that they take and how to keep them healthier and safe and out of the hospital. So really excited about the program from our organizational perspective, but I also understand that personal impact. And I can't stress enough how important I think this is for this information to be shared and integrated into not only the medical health record, but everything that we're doing. It has a huge impact. So thank you.
That's so interesting. And it sounds like because of your experience, you were familiar with pharmacogenomic testing, but I'm just curious, were your parents familiar with it?
No, not at all. And it took a little bit of sweet talking to get them to they kept saying, how are you gonna get my genes? And I'm like, we're just gonna swab your cheek. And they were open to that. But yeah, I know where I got my issues from, clearly, when their genetics came back. But yeah, no, they had no idea. And interestingly, even though we've done a lot of communication within our system and our network, the primary care physician, I had to do a conference call with them to explain to them why I wanted to have this testing done for my parents. So, and they jumped on board right away, but there's just so much for people to learn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's why patient education is so important in the space.
Yes.
Dr. Owusu-Obeng, what are the barriers that you have faced implementing clinical pharmacogenomics in your hospital system? Are there any negative impacts that have been caused by lack of provider education or patient education on pharmacogenomics that you can highlight? And have you heard from patients about any experiences directly that you've been able to use in informing your work?
Yeah, very good. Thanks for that. So when it comes to the barriers, I think we've alluded to that earlier. The main one, I think, is our stakeholder awareness or the lack thereof, right? So most of the time we are experiencing physicians, pharmacists, and even patients who are not aware of pharmacogenomics as even a discipline, let alone being a test that's available today clinically. And so when it comes to that, for us, we realized we did a survey before we started our program of the primary care physicians that we wanted to implement with. Initially, we decided to preemptively genotype about 2,000 patients. And so to do that, we had to go to our outpatient clinics, talk to the physicians there to see if they were willing to do it. So we did a pre-test or a pre-training survey, I should say, for the providers. And that's when we realized that although many of them had heard of genetic testing and its impact on medications, almost 90% of them had never ordered a test to define or to guide their prescribing decisions. So knowing that that was a huge barrier that we anticipated, but we didn't know that it was that much, up to about 90% at that time. So we created a program that was a 1-hour seminar type of setting where we would train them on pharmacogenomics, basically highlighting the evidence behind the examples that we wanted to implement. At that time, we wanted to start with just clopidogrel, which is an antiplatelet agent, simvastatin, which is a cholesterol medication, and warfarin, which is a blood thinner. And so at that time, those are the three. So we made sure that we went over the evidence for those. So stakeholder awareness is one of the main barriers. There are others as well, especially now that we are expanding the program, where we are seeing more about insurance coverage issues and concerns. And that we are seeing that from both patient side and the providers, that they don't want their patients to take on an additional cost. And patients would also raise that issue. However, whenever you get a chance to actually talk to the patient and explain the potential benefits of the test, show them that the cost is, at this point, is a few $100s. Some patients are actually willing to pay out of pocket. But because we don't get that chance to talk to every single patient, we are getting that barrier from the providers. And also, how do they manage the results, right? Post that initial use of that result. How are providers going to manage it? Is it just going to be, a PDF in the EHR like Dr. Reem mentioned earlier? Or is there going to be some support, ongoing and continual support that will alert them to every single time they need to use that result? And because of those things, we've also created some clinical decision support tools to help bridge that gap. So I would say the stakeholder awareness, insurance or economic benefits or effectiveness of the test, and also maybe clinical utility for the evidence. They want to see evidence showing clinical utility of pharmacogenomics and whether it actually impacts the outcomes or not. But we have many patient stories to date to show that. Recently, we did a test clinically, not under research protocol, clinically, for a patient that had tried several, antidepressants and was not just getting the right one. We did the test, was able to select one for the patient. Initially, even before they took the test, they felt so relieved that they were not the problem, that they were not the ones coming back saying, doctor, this doesn't work for me. And they felt that that was a burden, but once the results actually explained why it didn't work for them, they were very satisfied with that. And they have further come back to their doctors to say that the new medication is also working well. So we've seen some of those benefits as well.
Wonderful. Dr. Reem, we've already started hearing some important considerations regarding health IT and the impact on clinical use of this information. Can you just share with us what you think some of the other important considerations are, and also some of the lessons that you've learned about the adoption of genomic information in clinical practice that can be applied to pharmacogenomics?
Sure. I think one of the challenges that the broad field of genomics deals with is the fact that our knowledge is changing constantly. I've dealt with this in the rare disease genetic testing space, but we also deal with it in pharmacogenomics. For instance, we may understand a particular pharmacogenomic allele or the gene and its effect on a given drug, but then tomorrow we discover there's another drug that's also affected by that same gene or variant. And so there's a constantly evolving list of which drugs are relevant. And so that first report that's issued by a lab might point to one drug, but then you need an ability to update that knowledge and what's known about that particular gene or variant and the other drugs that it may have an impact on. The only way that we can manage that evolving knowledge base is to support it electronically. And we've launched systems to do this in the rare disease space, where a given variant and its interpretation may on day one be uncertain, but if it changes and it's now clinically significant for a patient, we can deliver that update. And what we found when we integrated these approaches into the electronic health record, that the physicians clicked on them at a 96% rate of clicking, recognizing the importance of that information and getting it in their hands in real time when it was needed. And so we really need to be able to evolve the EHR system for pharmacogenomics so that that new knowledge is constantly being there when it's needed. And if new drugs or new variants are associated to a given gene and the test that was run in that patient, that knowledge be updated and accessible in real time for each of those patients.
That's terrific. And Dr. Empey, I saw you nodding along with some of the conversation that came up just before this. So I'm guessing that some of what's already been said echo some considerations that you have for implementation of PGX in the clinic. But we know you lead the PreciseRx and Test to Learn teams that are implementing PGX clinical research and educational initiatives. Can you just share a little bit about these programs and your experience? And just your thoughts in general on how we can better prepare patients and providers for this type of information.
Certainly, I think we're going to hear some echoing comments. I think I did not a lot during those last talks, but I think we all share the same experiences as we're implementing. But that PreciseRx program here at UPMC, we started in 2015, and it's a standard of care. So every patient who enters our cardiac catheterization lab and needs a stent gets pharmacogenomic testing as part of their regular routine care. This is a use case you may be familiar with, but about a third of patients who get the most commonly prescribed medications won't have it work for them. Essentially, the drug is known not to be activated. So we work really closely with a bunch of researchers, and that IGNITE network was mentioned earlier, to demonstrate that testing and changes in therapy would reduce downstream risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death by essentially helping us choose the right medication at the outset. So that's really a key lesson learned at the beginning, that we could do this in practice. And then because of those lessons learned, our health system has moved on to thinking, as was mentioned earlier as well, that really panels are the way to go, because these are lifelong test results, and we can test once and reuse this data. And now we have a very large research study going on in our institution where we offer testing to 150,000 patients, and we ask them whether they want their results back. And again, to affirm the real strong desire among patients to get these data, over 90% of those patients are asking for the results to return from them directly. So lessons learned here, echo what was said about EHRs. Absolutely got to get the information in front of prescribers and to make sure it's shared. When you go to your pharmacy, does your pharmacist get the information downstream, or is it, say, locked up in the health system where testing was done? To echo the pharmacists are essential. They know a lot about how to administer and tailor drug therapy. And for us, they were the secret to our success. Education was key. The field's moving so quickly, and actually a lot of the providers out in practice either had genetics so long ago or the field's changed, and we need to think about how to best train things. So for us, establishing credentialing programs, training programs for continuing education, and really messaging right at the point of prescribing to say, wait, not this drug because of genomics, but rather this drug, was really key to the success. And then finally, I'll put a plug in for reimbursement as well. Beyond for test reimbursement out in practice by insurers, it's really essential to make sure we're also covering the services that are provided by clinicians, by physicians and pharmacists and genetic counselors that are spending the time to talk to patients and making sure we get the right therapy on them.
Thanks so much, Dr. Empey. We do have an extra few minutes for the panel. So I have a couple of other questions that I'll try to pose to you and see if you can respond to based on what we've been hearing through the chat box. The first is, we heard a bit about the potential use of PGX testing and the benefits to the Medicare and older adult population. But does anyone have any thoughts on the potential benefits for adopting PGX information for populations like pediatrics or other underserved communities? I
mean, I can make a brief comment. there are a lot of mental health medications that impact mental health. And if anyone's been living in the pandemic for the last couple of years, our teenage and pediatric populations are suffering, and a lot of them being put on psychiatric medications. And these drugs do have an effect, and it can be a long and winding road for families trying to find the right drugs to treat, mental health in children. And so I think this is absolutely an area that's really important for addressing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll also comment that, apart from mental health, there's also some good examples in pain management. And, with the whole opioid pandemic, I would say that we are experiencing now with pain medications are something that we need to find a better way to dose. Some patients would, and I say this because there are patients that might come into the healthcare system that we think are abusing opioids, right? And so they keep coming to the doctor's office, for instance, saying that, their oxycodone, hydrocodone, tramadol is not working for them. Oh, sorry. There's a potential that that's true. There's potential for abuse as well. But if we did have pharmacogenetic results and they are, for instance, a CYP2D6 poor metabolizer, they might not necessarily be benefiting from some of those medications. And so that can also help us to better, prescribe pain medications for opioids. Apart from pain meds, there are also many examples in cardiology as well. Even infectious diseases, transplant. So there are special populations. When it comes to pediatrics, there are some examples as well. There are pediatric centers that are implementing pharmacogenomics, like Nemours Children's Hospital, I believe Cincinnati Children's as well. So there are some examples in those populations as well.
Wonderful. We did hear a bit about clinical decision support and how that has a very critical role in trying to facilitate clinical implementation. Does anyone have any thoughts on clinical decision support tools and what they actually look like in practice and why they're beneficial?
Okay, so maybe I'll talk about our example. So when we started the program, there was no vendor that was providing what we call clinical decision support. What that truly is helping the prescriber or a doctor to make a decision in real time. So in our experience, we created a platform at Sinai that was embedded into our EHR, electronic health record system, where whenever the doctor goes to prescribe a medication, let's say simvastatin, and the patient has already been genotyped and they have a high-risk genotype, meaning that they might experience muscle toxicity from this medication, the doctor in real time, as they prescribe that medication and they hit send or order or prescribe whatever the action item there is, they will get an alert that pops up in front of them on their computers that tells them that this patient has this genotype and as a result might experience muscle toxicity from this medication. And also what we did is we provide alternative medications in that same order or alert for them. So the doctor would be able to choose to not continue with simvastatin, but to choose an alternative medication. In the clinical decision support is also another avenue to add educational materials. So we've embedded, links into the alert. If the doctor doesn't know anything about simvastatin and pharmacogenetics, they can click for more information, which will pull up additional information about that drug interaction, why we are doing this, everything that we might not be able to just fit in an alert, we put it in a link that's linked in that alert, and they can get further information that way too.
Great. We have an update that we may have Congressman Swalwell joining us in a few minutes, but I did want to touch briefly on issues related to patients paying for these tests. I know that you had mentioned that there were patients that would gladly pay to have access to this type of information, but are any of you aware of patient support or any other types of assistance that's available to allow folks access to PGX testing?
Maybe I can give a broad overview. First of all, reimbursement has changed. Recently there have been some significant changes to Medicare, specifically around offering testing in certain regions of the country. Not all states yet, but certain the medication administrative contractors have advanced new guidelines. So that helps us offer testing to that specific population. Some of the commercial insurers also have guidelines and have reimbursement policies around certain gene drug pairs. But we have a long way to go, not only to make sure everybody has broad coverage where the data supports it, but also to make sure people are aware where the coverage is and doesn't exist. Some of the companies that we work with have patient assistance programs where there's a maximum out-of-pocket expense for the test that we can offer that as a stopgap to patients that may not have insurance or may not have means of paying for it. So that's certainly helpful. So I don't want to oversell and say that the reimbursement landscape is solved, because it is not. We have more work to do and more communication around where the evidence lies in order to advance these policies, but we're making headway.
Thanks, Dr. Empey. And Ms. Holt, is there anything you'd like to add from the patient perspective?
No, I would just say that I was part of a study, but I believe, and I don't remember the specifics on this, but because my parents were on Medicare and at the age that they were, that they did not have any out-of-pocket expenses.
That's great. Okay, well, I am actually going to ask you all to take a minute or two just to share any final thoughts you have about best practices or additional work that needs to be accomplished to enable the use of pharmacogenomic information in routine clinical practice. Dr. Empey, let's start with you. And you can take more than a minute. I know you were told to do a rapid fire, but if you have any more that you'd like to share, please do.
I'm going to put a plug in for education again, because I do think education is critical. We learned it was when we first launched. I think it's still essential. I think this bill that was advanced makes that emphasis as well. So I certainly applaud that. The other thing is just awareness, as was mentioned earlier as well. And you can see in some of the questions that are being put forward. The Clinical Pharmacogenetics Implementation Consortium is a international group now housed in the US at St. Jude that promulgates guidelines that are open access and available. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these gene drug pairs or the state of the literature, I direct you there. It's cpicpgx.org, and it's really a tremendous resource, which a lot of us depend upon in terms of helping to advance these guidelines in our practice.
Great. Dr. Ream?
Yeah, and I certainly agree with the education aspects, but I'll also have a push for timeliness. Right now it is a difficult timing issue with pharmacogenomics where when a patient sees a physician for a particular issue, they want to prescribe a drug right then and there. And if they have to wait several weeks for the results of pharmacogenomics, which can extend on much longer when you have to go through prior approval for payment and all the steps that patients often have to go through. And so really trying to think about what's the optimal way to offer pharmacogenomics, and that is really having those results in hand before the drug needs to be prescribed. And that is where we have to think about a combination of panels for pharmacogenomics tests, so all those results are ready when the drug needs to be prescribed, as well as clinical decision support, so that the physician who didn't know the patient ever had that testing is provided with the support as soon as they enter the drug they want to prescribe into the EHR, that the guidance is there. Oh, this patient already has a test result, and this suggests you should start them at this dose, or this suggests you shouldn't use that drug, you should use a different one. And that's all there for them. And I think adoption, would be much better, and the timeliness and efficacy would be much higher.
Great. Ms. Holt?
don't really have any comments on that.
Okay. Dr. Owusu-Obeng?
Yeah, so I agree with what Phil and Heidi both mentioned earlier. I think education is important, especially repetitive education, because we've seen some studies. I mean, recently in 2020, there was a paper that showed that providers who were previously educated and trained, when they went back to resurvey them, almost 70% said they didn't have enough information or knowledge to even implement pharmacogenomics. So there has to be something that's more frequent on a more recurrent, basis for education. I also think that patient empowerment should be something that we stress. The public awareness of this needs to be out there, because of course our healthcare systems are not, integrated. They're all very segmented. The patient is the only constant between healthcare systems. So if we actually empower the patients to understand their results, to have copies of their results, that wherever they go, that they will be the ones, advocating for themselves, telling the doctors, hey, I did this pharmacogenetic test. My doctor previously used that. Can you consider, reviewing it? Yes, there will be providers who might not have the knowledge to do so, but that will prompt them to seek help and experts. And that will prompt them to work with their pharmacists and others to get that patient the right medication at the right dose at the right time, right? So patient empowerment is key. And of course, the reimbursement landscape has to be really dealt with, or the test costs have to be much lower so some of our patients can afford it. But I think that commercial labs are doing a good job now with offering these financial assistance as well.
Could not agree more. And your timing was perfect. I would like to thank all of you for a terrific panel discussion, and also for everything that you do every day of your lives to support patients, providers, and the field of personalized medicine in general. You're just terrific, and we can't thank you enough for your time today. So with that, I have the honor of introducing Representative Eric Swalwell. With Congressman Tom Emmer, they're champions of personalized medicine in the House of Representatives through their leadership of the Congressional Personalized Medicine Caucus. Representative Swalwell was first elected to Congress in 2012. Prior to serving in the House of Representatives, he served on the City Council for Dublin, California, and spent 7 years as a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office after earning undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Maryland. He's now in his 4th term in Congress. Congressman Swalwell is proudly representing California's 15th district, where he grew up. So Congressman Swalwell, thank you so much for being here today, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and the Personalized Medicine Coalition, as well as from Invite, Megan, Jennifer, and Jay, for really stitching together this briefing. I come to you from a meeting with 5 Ukrainian members of parliament who are in Washington, D.C., asking desperately for more help for their country. And I know the message today is on personalized medicine, but I know all of us as citizens of a democracy are just touched by what is going on over there. And I just want to give you an update that as a subcommittee chair on the Intelligence Committee, I'm pressing that we do all we can to make sure that we defeat Russia in its invasion over there. I was just on the Ukraine border on Thursday, and it is just heartbreaking as a father of 3 kids to see all these women getting off trains with just one suitcase and a bunch of little kids, confused, scared, and not knowing what's next. And so that is, my top priority right now is to just, make sure that never comes to us, because history shows that sometimes it can. But here at home, you're doing the important work of personalized medicine. And while the Ukraine crisis has brought together Republicans and Democrats, personalized medicine has always been a bipartisan issue in the Congress. And I'm grateful that my colleague from Minnesota, Tom Emmer, is a partner with me in this endeavor. And look, Tom and I may not agree on, how we pay for healthcare, and we probably differ on the Affordable Care Act. But Tom and I both absolutely agree that innovation really can be a force multiplier as far as increasing access, reducing cost, and extending quality of life. And I can tell you is, I've got a very dear family member right now battling for her life, and it has benefited in ways that people 10 years ago, 15 years ago would not have because of the advancements in personalized medicine, and a number of friends right now who are also in their own personal battles. And that reflects what you experience if you're on this call today. You know someone who's in a battle, and we're making progress, but we can make much, much more progress if we continue to fund innovation and enable innovation through the FDA. Now, Tom and I have authored the Right Drug Dose Now Act, which would address the barriers of implementing evidence-based pharmacogenomic testing into routine clinical practice. And just to lay out for you, it would require an assessment and update of the National Action Plan for Adverse Drug Event Prevention and create educational campaigns for both the general public, which is important that they are put on notice, and healthcare providers to increase awareness of pharmacogenomic testing and adverse events. The bill would also provide electronic health record systems to ensure healthcare providers are alerted to interactions between medications and genes when making prescribing decisions to, of course, avoid a disastrous outcome and make sure it's one that is the most efficient and most effective for the patients receiving it. So, information about drug-gene interactions is not yet well integrated today in patient care, and this seeks to get us to that place. So, again, as someone who's personally, watching family members go through this, and someone who has constituents who write to me every day about what the cost of drugs mean in their lives, and as I'm looking through the chat here, I see a number of concerns about the cost, and that the out-of-pocket costs are, creating so much anxiety. We know that when we invest in innovation, we increase someone's ability, to have access to the most effective medication. So also Sarah Shapiro on my team has done such great work as a legislative aide and now our legislative director. And I encourage you to continue to reach out to her as you have ideas in this field. But there's so much hope for what's ahead. We've made so much progress in just the last 10 years. And I have another company in my district called 10X Genomics, also a very valuable partner in this field. And I met with their founder a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him point blank, and this is only a 10-year-old company, and I'm a 10-year-old member of Congress. We both, he got started in a garage in my district, and I was knocking on that garage door to run for Congress 10 years ago. But I asked him, I said, knowing what you know about genomics, what year could COVID have occurred where we would have found a vaccine, an mRNA vaccine, within a year? And he said it had to have been 2020. He said if it had occurred any time before, we would still be in the thick of the pandemic. And that just shows that these investments in innovation, not only can they address the crisis of the day, and thank God we made those mRNA investments, but we learned so much from them that we can project into other fields of medicine. And I look at that for personalized medicine as well. So keep doing the good work that you're doing. Keep educating me and my staff on how we can better do it. And this will always be a bipartisan issue that brings us together for the good of the patients and the healthcare community. So thank you all again for your good work, and looking forward to more successes in the future.
Thank you so much. And we're so fortunate to have leaders like you working to advance personalized medicine, and our best to you and your family and your friends who are battling serious illness. We hope that they have what they need to have the best outcomes. Great. So with that, I'll actually turn things over to Benjamin Brown and Sarah Rogers from the American Society of Pharmacovigilance to talk a little bit more about the RIGHT Act and also to close out the program. Thank you all so much for your attention today.
Great, thank you, Cynthia. And on behalf of the American Society of Pharmacovigilance, thank all of you for joining us today as we discuss serious and pervasive, but also preventable issues in healthcare. My name is Sarah Rogers. I serve as the president of the American Society of Pharmacovigilance, and I'm joined with ASP's Executive Director, Ben Brown. We're thankful to today's panelists for sharing their perspectives and highlighting many important challenges and opportunities as we work together to address the fourth leading cause of death in America. The silver lining to the many tragedies that occur each and every day is that there are things that we can do to prevent them. We have the tools, we have the technology, and now we have legislation introduced by Representatives Swalwell and Emmer, which seeks to address many of the challenges identified during today's panel discussion. And Representative Swalwell really highlighted what is on the slide here in terms of the Right Drug Dose Now Act. The RIGHT Act represents an opportunity towards making healthcare safer by catalyzing a new paradigm in personalized medicine, ensuring that each patient gets the right medication. If you visit fourthcause.org/Right Act, you can read more about the bill, including a section-by-section summary. You can also support the bill by signing on as an individual or on behalf of your organization. A full list of organizations who have already signed on to support the RIGHT Act is also available at fourthcause.org/Right Act. Again, thank you for your time today. We have received several attendee questions, so I will now turn it over to ASP's Executive Director, Ben Brown, to ask your questions to the panelists.
Hi, good morning and afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here, and we're excited for all the excitement and advocacy for the RIGHT Act. To kick things off with the Q&A, I have a question for all of the panelists that I'd like to share, and one that recently just came in, which specifically is, there's a comment in the Q&A about the lack of diversity in genetic databases. And could you speak to the ways that the genetics community is seeking to address this issue and to make sure that there is evidence available for various ethnic groups in your local settings?
I'm happy to start. I'm sure the others can weigh in. One program that's going on right now is called the All of Us Research Program, which is enrolling 1 million individuals in the US. We're, over 300,000 already are enrolled. And that has sought to enroll a very diverse population. In fact, right now, 80% of individuals are considered underrepresented in biomedical research, with over 50% representing diverse racial backgrounds. And I think that will, those individuals are also being sequenced. Our genome centers are sequencing them as we speak, and that data will be connected to their electronic health records and the phenotype data, the clinical data from each individual. That will become an incredibly powerful resource to understand more about the diverse, interactions between genes and environment and health traits that I think will better inform the diversity of genetics that underlies both pharmacogenomics and many other health factors.
Perfect.
Add a little bit more onto that, and actually a little bit maybe more on the All of Us program. And part of that program is actually focused on the return of pharmacogenomic information. So really relevant to today's talk. That information was deemed really important by participants into the program. So those genome centers have made it a priority, along with other genetic information, to make it available to participants, hopefully in the coming year. So that's really exciting. At our own institutions, we certainly value diversity. The comment is accurate, and a lot of the early studies was done predominantly on individuals of European ancestry. And I think as we enrich those populations with broader ethnic communities coming into research, we're learning a lot more. We're learning a lot more about variants that are important within those populations. So it's absolutely critical. We make an effort here in Pittsburgh to increase the diversity, just as with the All of Us program. And it's a real thrust of the genetics community.
Yeah, and to quickly add on to that too, I think having the opportunity to work in New York City, Mount Sinai being in Upper East Side, we've had a lot of patients from the Hispanic communities as well as African ancestry. In fact, our pharmacogenomics cohort is about 70% made up of Hispanics and African ancestry, 35% Hispanic, about 30% African ancestry thereabout. So yeah, we do, we value diversity. In fact, with one of our implementations, the warfarin one, we had to revise the implementation because of this particular issue, that we found out that the implementation at that time, which is I believe 2014, was not, the evidence did not support implementing for patients of non-European ancestry. So as a result of that, and also knowing our patient population, we revised the implementation and devised a novel strategy for them. So having diverse participants in our research, especially genomic research, is so important. And that's why we encourage people to enroll in our biobanks, enroll in the All of Us program as well, so that we can learn enough to benefit all patients and not just those of European ancestry.
Thank you. Thank all of you. Another question we had come in was, one of the outcomes of the RIGHT Act would be better information for patients. But are there any materials or activities that could help better explain PGX testing to patients or providers?
I'll take this one because I've had a lot of student activities around patient education where we devised a few social media memes, right? We use the memes that are going viral, but we have a pharmacogenomics twist to it. And that's one way that we are trying to engage the public. We've also created a lot of patient videos with real life patient stories, not just very much on the technical things of pharmacogenomics, but just to get patients to understand that there's this notion out there where we can use your DNA to determine more than just whether you are related to someone or for a crime, because most patients are just associate DNA with crime shows on TV, right? So, but there are other things other than that that your DNA can help us with. So we've been creating patient education videos, brochures, and my favorite are the social media memes.
I'll also say that, that Phil mentioned the All of Us research program and the return of pharmacogenomic results. So one of the groups that's supported for the All of Us research program, Color, did informational testing with the reports to patients to see if they understood the information being relayed. And actually is quite interesting. First of all, the word pharmacogenomic is not widely understood by the average individual. They thought it was more to do with economics, the X part of the term, and that it was, more useful just to simply use the word drug and gene interactions, or, so I think that's teaching us, how to best communicate this information to the average individual who may not understand, what a pharmacogenomic, result is. And so I think it's really important that we both educate the general population as well as physicians in how to use this information.
Dr. Emp, any closing remarks on that?
Just to add, it's if you look at the general consumer space for genetic testing, you can go to your local pharmacy and find these for on $100 on the shelf. So in many ways, our patients are driving this. They come into us and say, I did this test result. What does it mean for me? So for those thinking that it has to come from providers only, I would just remind everyone that there's quite a groundswell among patients. We heard patient stories earlier. I think this is real. It makes sense to patients. And if we can help them take that energy they're putting into consumer-based testing, understand what was driving them to that, and whether it makes sense to go into clinical testing for pharmacogenomics may help accelerate the field as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add that fact, it was a big issue. It was discussed at the American College of Medical Genetics and Genomics meeting last week, that so many physicians are being handed direct to consumer reports from patients saying, do something with this. But some of these are CLIA certified valid results and others are not. And the physicians are having trouble sorting out what's appropriate to integrate in the medical record and what's not. And that's where this RIGHT Act would be really important, because it would allow support for the hospitals to integrate the appropriate results and not the inappropriate results into the electronic health records, that each individual physician doesn't have to manage that with whatever report their patient shows up with.
Thank you, Dr. Ream. And thank each and every one of you for your attendance and participation in today's briefing. We'd especially like to thank Congressman Swalwell and Emmer for making precision medicine a priority, including both Sarah Shapiro and Ryan Altman for their diligent and focused work, without whom this wouldn't be possible. Please don't hesitate to follow up directly with them and share your support for this bill. Additionally, we'd like to thank the Personalized Medicine Coalition, Invitae, iPolicy Solutions, and the American Society of Pharmacovigilance for organizing and assembling this event, including all of our speakers and panelists today. This is our moment. This is a great first step. This is our opportunity to advance the promise of precision medicine and make into a reality a vision that all Americans desire and deserve: the safest and most effective medication experience for themselves and their loved ones every time. Pharmacogenetics testing has the power to do this. Congress has the power to do this. Everyone here today has the power to do this. We highly encourage everyone to learn more about the RIGHT Act at fourthcause.org, get involved, and look forward to continuing to work closely with everyone on priorities that will advance precision medicine and prevent premature death due to adverse drug events once and for all. Thank you very much for your time today.